name is Salvador Garcia. You can refer to me as Sal, doesn't matter. But we will go ahead and get started. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you so much, Sally. I appreciate that and all of those housekeeping items. Just a quick good afternoon to everyone here with us live and those who may be watching the recording as well. We're excited to be here together today to discuss education's famous R word, rigor. The concept of rigor has an interesting place, actually, in the story of US education, where it became essentially a national buzzword in the early 2010s, only to find out like 5 or 6 years later that no one actually could agree on what it meant. And that really led to some major pushback from educators. And that really leads us to where we are today, not only to dig deeper into its meaning, but to redefine what it actually looks like in classrooms. And in order to do that, we have some fantastic panelists from all different backgrounds here with us today. So before we dig in, let's actually meet our esteemed panelists. Before I actually introduce the panelists, I do want to introduce my colleague, Kyle. If you want to give a wave, and feel free to come off mute, obviously, Kyle, and say hello quick.
Everyone, thanks so much for joining our panel. Excited for the conversation today.
Thanks, Kyle. All right, let's dig into our panelists here. First, we have Dr. Jennifer Berry, who's the Chief Executive Officer for Smart Lab. She has an extensive track record leading innovation and growth in multiple top K-12 education businesses and continues to further the mission of transforming the lives of future generations through innovative, career-focused STEM education solutions. Dr. Berry has spent the last 15 plus years in senior leadership positions for prominent K-12 organizations, including Presence, After School All-Stars, Quantum Learning, and Kaplan. Dr. Berry holds a Doctor of Education in Organizational Change and Leadership from the University of Southern California, and her commitment to education is inspired by her daughter and a love of lifelong learning. She is a resident of San Diego, California. So glad to have you with us here today, Dr. Berry. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate being here, and I'm so honored to be amongst this esteemed panel.
Also joining us today is Lawrence Hanson, the principal of St. Joseph Hill Academy Elementary School with 26 years of experience in education. He has spent 17 years as a teacher and the past 9 as principal, where he leads instructional innovation and school-wide initiatives focused on student-centered learning. At St. Joseph Hill, Principal Hanson has spearheaded an increase in pre-K through 8 project-based learning and performance-based assessments that promote critical thinking and cross-curricular connections. He's known for driving meaningful school improvement, supporting teacher growth, and creating engaging, future-ready learning experiences for students. Beyond his school, Principal Hanson has served on his parish education advisory committee, including as chair, and collaborates with fellow leaders through the Curran Principal Academy. He's also currently part of the Latino Engagement Institute at the University of Notre Dame, where he supports Catholic school leaders in building culturally responsive environments and strengthening outreach to Latino communities. We're thrilled to also have him with us today to share his insights on project-based learning. Please join me in welcoming Principal Hanson.
Thank you. Looking very excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Tarek Alamarie, who is the principal of Richmond Hill High School, and he has dedicated 18 years of service to the New York City Public Schools. Throughout his career, he has played a key role in turning around struggling schools, including significant improvement efforts at John Adams High School, and has continued to expand growth and innovation at Richmond Hill. At Richmond Hill High School, Principal Alamarie has led a comprehensive transformation of the school into 6 career-connected academies, aligning instruction with real-world pathways and preparing students for future success. Under his leadership, the school's graduation rate and attendance has increased, and Richmond Hill has become an early college high school. Through his vision and collaborative leadership, the school now maintains 15 college partnerships, offering extensive dual enrollment opportunities. As a result, students have the ability to graduate from high school with over 60 college credits, positioning them strongly for post-secondary achievement. Welcome, Principal Alamarie.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. And I myself and am Emily Duball. I'm a client and program success manager here at Educate, and I'm super excited to be here with you all today and to hear from this panel. So let's go ahead and dig right in. To get us started, let's make things really tangible and define deep learning by what it sounds and looks like. So panelists will open up with this question for you. How do you know deep learning is happening? What does it sound and look like? Describe a classroom moment that represents deep learning in your school or a school that you partner with. I'll open it up to anybody on the panel who wants to dive in first.
Sure, I'll go ahead if that's okay.
Go for it.
Right, so I would say in our school, the difference between, we often think about like working hard and doing hard work, and that hard work sometimes that you think of if they're working hard because I gave them so many tasks to complete, or I gave them more materials, or I gave them more math problems, and we say, oh, they're working hard because they did all of that, they completed all of those workbook pages, right? But I think the difference is with deep learning, the students are asking questions, they're revising, they're thinking. They're making connections across the subject areas. There's a lot of productive conversation going on in the classroom. They're asking questions. They're explaining their reasoning, not just to the teacher, but to their classmates, respectfully challenging each other's findings, using a lot of academic vocabulary, right? I think it just sort of, you feel that vibe in the classroom change from the students just working and doing something on their own to seeing that them making those deeper connections. As far as an example, like I think one of the first times I saw this happening is we use Project Lead the Way as our curriculum for science, our science classes, pre-K to 8, but our seventh graders, one of the things that they get most excited about every year is they do a class called Medical Detectives, where they take on the role of a doctor or a scientist in the classroom. And one of the things they do is they dissect a sheep's brain, and they look for abnormalities in the sheep's brain. So they do this in groups. And it was wonderful to see how they were making those connections across the curriculum, right? So they had, they were, taking the pieces of the sheep's brain that they had to dissect and take off, and they were plotting the size of it. When they found an abnormality, they had to graph the size of it. They were inputting the information into a form on the computer, looking at pieces of it under the microscope, and then writing down their findings, and then coming back and being able to communicate their findings to their classmates, and then engaging in discussion with each other about what they found and then making the comparisons to what they learned about a human brain and the findings that they had about abnormalities in human brains. And we were blessed that we have an anatomage table, and they were able to then look at a cross section of a human brain with an abnormality in the human brain, and then make those connections between the two, and then write about it and then present on it, right? So it was all of those processes going on at the same time, and it sort of piqued their interest, right? And it was less about giving them just the materials, and saying, now read about these abnormalities in the brain and answer those basic questions, right? So having all of those tools in their toolbox, and then being able to see how they made the connections between the things that they learned about in math, and plotting and creating these charts and diagrams, and then being able to have the ability to write their findings and then explain their findings, and then compare that with the findings of their classmates, and engage in that discussion was great.
I'll jump in here. I love what you said, Lawrence, about this concept of hard learning might mean that it takes longer, right? Or it has more steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think in some cases that misconception in education is that hard automatically means deep, right? And what you're describing and what I've seen in what we do at Smart Lab is that deep learning is different. It really changes how the students think, right? It shows up when students are iterating, when they're questioning assumptions, when they're explaining their reasoning. That's when it's going deep. Right? It's sort of, it sounds like students saying, why didn't this work? or how could we improve this design, right? We have an example at Smart Lab where I was in a school the other day in middle school, and they were doing an urban planning exercise, right? And they were taking on the role of urban planners and architects. And at first, um, when you kind of do a unit like that, you think about the aesthetics, right? That looks impressive, right? What they designed was impressive, right? But as they investigate the stakeholders' needs, the environmental impact, maybe the construction constraints, that's when their design was starting to evolve. I was watching it happen. It's like when they were starting to challenge, like, oh, I wonder what this stakeholder that's going to be going into this building needs. That's when their design started to evolve, and that's when it started to go deeper, right? I observed one particular team that was really questioning these things, like, who are the stakeholders, what's the environmental impact, what are the construction constraints. I started to see they completely redesigned their initial idea, because they realized their initial model that they built, although it was aesthetically pleasing, it didn't meet and consider accessibility, environmental and sustainability. They were really starting to challenge that. And that shift from surface design to systems thinking is really when I felt and saw deep learning occur, like that deep learning process really shift. And that to me is where it goes from hard to deep. And when the thinking is being shifted.
Love that distinction between hard and deep. Yeah, I love that.
So it's interesting because I was looking at, deep learning in the classroom today, and some of the feedback, which is positive, where there was evidence from the fall to the spring in my school of deep learning, and the answer is different across subject areas, right? So to give you an example, I went into a CTE lab today, and I saw a student, working on, one of the programs where you do like sketching and you use like 3D printers to print out your idea. I didn't know there was a 3D printer in the classroom, but he was working on another project and designing it and going through the whole process. And I asked him what he was doing. He's like, I'm basically creating a cell phone holder. And I was like, wow, interesting. He's like, hold on a second. So he takes me to, he's like, come, let's go to the printer. And I didn't know the printer's in the back. It was, printing. He's like, I pressed print yesterday and it's almost done. So he actually printed out and he actually designed, he mocked up and programmed a system to print a cell phone holder that fits perfectly his actual phone, which was just to be a little bit detailed, an iPhone 17 Pro, which is a different size than the regular iPhone 17. And he showed me the actual finished product of the one he was working on yesterday, or finished yesterday, but he was working on now a iPad version of it. So that to me was, and nobody was helping him. They knew what to do already. The teacher already pre-supported the students in previous lessons, and now they're all working on different things that they could potentially sell in the real world. Then it looks very different in English, for example, right? When you go into an English class, it could involve deep classroom discussion that's uninterrupted by the teacher, and you see that growth with the back and forth. And you see, on Bloom's taxonomy, it can be start off from a lower level question to all of a sudden they're critiquing each other and analyzing each other's answers and digging deeper into either primary sources to support their answers, or just from recall knowledge to build on each other's ideas, right? And in math, looks completely different as well, right? You can have students working on a hands-on activity using, if they're in geometry, using measurements and then applying that to the real world with engineering or in construction. But when I went to school, I wasn't fortunate enough to tie those two together. I was just learning the actual, from the textbook and not applying, the geometry to, engineering or building or, just the measurement of things, right? And that type of thing. So application to real world gets the students to think of what they're doing actually makes sense. Um, so that's to me, it's different. in each class, with how it looks.
Thank you, Principal Emery. I appreciate it. And I'm hearing kind of a common thread throughout, though, too. Principal Hansen, you mentioned vibe, right? I think that's it's an ambiguous word, but it's a real word. When you're thinking about, Dr. Berger talking about iteration, Principal Almery, you're talking about kind of that student voice piece, having discussions, taking it kind of to the next level. And all of this actually connects us really well to our next question around productive struggle, right? All of these pieces that you're describing here really is a moment where the teacher's kind of stepping back, right? The facilitation, I'm thinking of it like a snowball in a good way, in a positive way, going down a hill and getting faster and faster, and the teacher's kind of stepping back to allow this to happen. In research, it's often cited that the importance of productive struggle and thinking to hap- making sure that that's happening before engaging with kind of the AI piece, right? When AI came into the mix, right? I obviously it's been in the mix for a while, but it's starting to kind of become part of the spotlight now. How has this idea of rigorous learning shifted? And drawing in that idea of productive struggle, how are we ensuring that that is a continued piece of rigorous learning or deeper thinking, however you want to kind of define it for yourself today? How has that shifted now that AI is in the mix?
I'll jump in here first. And I'm sure my principal friends will agree that productive struggle is essential to learning. Like it's just part of it. And in fact, in the workforce, it's essential to success, right? You have to fail fail quickly in order to get to the next best idea. And that productive struggle of really working to figure it out is really essential to learning. I have found in not only the research that we have dug into at Smart Lab, but also just in my viewing and watching as students are engaging in project-based learning, hands-on learning, is that it's about the sequencing. So it's sequencing the learning so that students do the cognitive work first. And then AI can maybe clarify that or make it more efficient after. This rigor comes from ensuring that the students own the thinking before the tools. And then the tools are there to enhance it, right? So like productive struggle in my observation has to happen first, right? We are an AI powered world. The students are going to know more about AI than any of us are struggling to figure out. It's part of their DNA. I have an 11-year-old. I watch AI. It's just absolutely part of her world. There's no question about it. But what I love about what AI can do if you put it at the end of the process is have the students really debug, revise, figure it out, ask the questions, do what both of my colleagues here have mentioned earlier about challenging each other and having that deeper learning discussion. And then you can use AI to refine the idea, improve the efficiency maybe. And that the rigor comes from the sequencing of the process, right? Rather than jumping to AI first, really doing the struggle first and the questioning and the deep learning first, and then having AI be sort of the bow around it, right? That way, the rigor is the cognitive ownership, right? I always think like rigor equals cognitive ownership, right? So and I see that often, specifically in some of our units. I was just in a elementary school last week. We did a ribbon cutting in Crete Monet in Chicago, the Chicagoland area. And it was fascinating to see how they were using AI to supplement on time. This was an elementary school to supplement the student being able to figure out the problem first, to figure out how to do it with their peers in their group and how to solve project starter that they were working on. And then they would question AI, like, is there another way based on what we've discovered that could make this even stronger? And they put in the information and AI would say, well, I feel like you've, answered the question, but maybe if you layered on this, it could make it even So that sequencing, I have found, that is what the rigor is. The rigor is in the sequencing, and sequencing has to start with learning for students with that productive struggle first, in my opinion.
Thanks, Dr. Berry. Appreciate it.
I just to sort of piggyback off what you were saying there, I think there's a lot to that. Especially the idea that AI is sort of part of that toolbox that the kids have, right? It's part of that, and it's part of the toolbox. It's not the answer key, right? So and I think when I think about productive struggle, I think it's like taking them out of their comfort zone, and you're giving them. It's not building frustration, but it's just they're grappling with that problem just long enough that they're building this understanding of it, and it has, they're doing all the brainstorming, they're testing the ideas, they're collaborating, they attempt solutions, they fail, and then that AI comes in as the tool to extend that thinking, right? To provide more resources for them, like you said, build upon what, the questions they've already asked themselves and say, what else can we do with this, and offer that new perspective for it. And I think that it does have a lot of really positive things that it can offer in a classroom. But like you said, after they've already engaged in that productive, that thinking process, they've already engaged in that productive struggle, and then the AI comes in just to, to fill in some of the pieces that, that towards the end that they may have, that they could add to it.
Yeah. It's kind of like the have you thought about this though? Like it's
Right.
the added opinion. Yeah, for sure. Prince Mallory, do you want to add to that at all?
So it's interesting because we hear, and I'm going from the school setting because we're working with a lot of different platforms on this, and we're currently using Brisk. We use Brisk and downloaded it. It's basically a Chrome extension for all technology in the building. And we're actually encouraging teachers to use Brisk for lesson planning, but also on the student side, the way Brisk is designed is not to just give you the answer or just answer it like you would go into like a regular like Gemini. It's actually designed to have that productive struggle. So I think artificial intelligence is going to be a tool that's going to um, what's the word I want to use? It's going to adapt to different technologies as well as adapt to different fields. So the way I perceive it being used in education is having a thinking partner, right? So that's what Brisk can do. You can ask Brisk a question, and they will guide you toward the thinking, but not give you the answer. So that's the key there.
Mm,
And I think eventually, just like we can block out TikTok in schools, schools will probably maybe the DOE is probably going to block just like Gemini the way it's written right now. It's probably going to be written in so many different ways. Gemini for engineering, Gemini for education, Gemini for I think we're not there yet. I think it's going to evolve over time. Like pretty soon, Apple's trying to have Siri develop AI. What they might end up doing is just contract Gemini, right? And then we didn't know that a year ago, but again, people are, I guess settling into how AI is going to impact life. And going back to the productive struggle, using AI as is, there's no, regulation. A student can have the write an essay if they want. But as regulations continue to come out, and I know a couple days ago they just released Department of Education guidelines on the use of AI. I
right.
think that's going to be enhanced. I think right now it's just the beginning of how AI is going to be used.
Hmm.
The same way when the calculator came out in the early 60s. And people saw that as a problem. Like you're a cheater. I'm using my abacus and look at you. Like so
Back to the
eventually
days of the
now you buy
abacus.
graphing calculators for kids to use it on the Regents exams because they're doing what math was before, the kids are doing it in eighth grade, right? So I think it's going to continue to evolve, and it's going to have for education purposes, the productive struggle is going to be built into it, and then there will be differentiating factors, knowing if you generated something or AI generated it.
For sure. And that's an interesting thought too, just will the definition of productive struggle also evolve, right?
Mhm.
As we're moving forward, how will that kind of continue to to morph, I guess, over time. We're going to shift gears a little bit here. And Principal Elmer, you mentioned your teachers engaging in AI for lesson planning. We're going to talk about rigor from through the lens of a teacher. And I would love, actually, Dr. Berry, if I can sort of put you on the spot first. You have a background in organizational change, and so we're talking about right now rigor as a form of, basically an ask for teacher, right? We want to make sure that teachers are giving opportunities for students in classrooms that encourage deep thinking, that are rigorous, right? If we want to go back to that word again. Given your background, Dr. Berry, on organizational change and leadership, what have you seen schools do successfully to kind of shift their culture from compliance driven to more, authentic rigor, problem solving, and compliance in both places, right? Compliance as far as teachers are integrating deeper thinking opportunities because they see the power of it, right? Not just I need to put these in, so I'm going to check it off. But then also on the student side, um, where is compliance kind of in this space of rigor, and how am I supporting that culture of I want to, as a student, engage in authentic rigor and problem solving rather than just compliance driven, I'm going to get the right answer kind of learning experiences.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I'm so excited that this is a conversation that is happening, especially in the light of this AI powered world, because even teachers are using AI to serve them to be better and more masterful at their crafts. We all know that compliance happens when students are completing their work because it's assigned, right? If it's assigned, and they complete it, that's compliance. This engagement
Right.
shift that we're referring to, and that, I've had the pleasure of like digging and studying for years, is when students see the meaning in the work. When the students see the meaning of the work, like I could give that example, if you walk into a room, if students are rushing before the bell rings, I have to finish this to that, and that's in their mind. I have to finish this because the bell's about to ring and I was assigned this task.
Mm.
Versus, I want to see if this works. I want to see if I can solve this problem. That shift changes not only energy in the room, but changes that compliance to engagement, right? And when you talk about teachers figuring out ways to help students move to, I have to finish this because I'm going to be compliant to finish what I was asked to do by my teacher, versus I am so engaged in what's in front of me. I want to see if this works. I want to see if I can solve this. I want to see if I can conquer this problem. Right. And that obviously is, instead of memorizing concepts, students are applying deep challenges and real
Mhm.
world solving. At Smart Lab, we really try to focus on two things. One, that we're focusing on STEM identity, not just STEM hands-on project-based learning, because STEM is just a thing. Eventually AI is going to code everything. It's going to be able to design most things on its own. But if we can get students to move to how I think about something, how I approach a problem, how I am okay with productive struggle, how I can master rigorous challenges. When we get that shift in students' brains, that's what we call STEM identity, because STEM identity is I belong, and in any industry, in any problem that's being solved in this world, because I believe I can, I believe I belong, I believe I
I
can
love that.
master rigorous challenges, right? And that really is STEM identity. STEM, because it's an acronym, right? Science, technology, engineering, math, is sort of pigeonholed there. But if you think about it, there's not a industry out there, there's not a career or a job out there that doesn't use a STEM application. There's not one. And I've been pushing my team to challenge to find what is a job out there that doesn't use some sort of STEM application to drive that career or that industry forward. And all of them do, right? Maybe not the job particularly, but then how that job gets to a spreadsheet, and you have to analyze that spreadsheet in order to drive momentum forward for that industry or that career. There's STEM applications in everything we do. So if we have students that come out with this STEM identity where they believe they can master rigorous challenges, and they believe they belong in that, and they add value, then that's when it
Sure.
shifts from, and if teachers are thinking about, how do I connect this to real world problems? How do I connect what they're learning, even at the most basic English class, history class, math classes? How can I connect this to real world problems or real world industries or real careers? That's when students move from, I'm just learning this to be compliant, to and I have to finish this because my teacher said I have to finish it by the time the bell rings, to I want to see if this works. I want to see if I can figure this out. And that shift is really where it moves from compliance to engagement. And that's when I see that happening, those aha moments in students' eyes, where, those sudden realizations happen for them, that's when engagement enhances. And that's when student learning is, to me, not only deep, but at a higher order thinking level, even at the youngest ages. And we see this even in, TKers and kindergartners, when they get that shift and have those aha moments, that's when they move from compliance to engagement.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's such an important thing to recognize that the space has to be ripe for that. Right. And what you're talking about as far as the STEM identity, it's reminded me a lot of like habits of mind and those things. For a lot of students that are not coming in with those instilled, we need to be directly talking about those, using the language in the classroom right alongside the learning, and then creating this space, this dynamic space that allows for, those muscles to be flexed, so to speak, to really, set them up for that experience. Um, Principal Hanson, anything you want to add to this kind of idea of rigor not as compliance?
I think that was a really wonderful way of summing it up. It's this, like, that idea of moving from I have to do this, right, to this I want to figure this out, right? It's that idea of, like, that rigor doesn't have to mean just doing more work. It's making, and it can be rigorous because it's more meaningful to them, right? And that's where the rigor comes in. And and now I'm just not being I'm engaged. I'm not just being compliant. I'm being engaged to it. Sometimes you see that when you walk into a classroom and the students are so focused on working, like you said, working on a project, and they're collaborating with each other and they're talking about it. I had a teacher who was subbing here with us at the beginning of the year, and she came from a very traditional classroom setting. Right, the students sat in their rows. They didn't get up out of the desk. They had to raise their hand to do everything, and our classroom settings are really not like that. They're working in groups. They're moving about the classroom, and they were working. There was an ELA lesson, and they were constantly. She said, I had to change their seats because they were talking. She said, and the next day, they just talked to someone else. And she said, and then I realized that the conversations they were having was all about the work that we were doing in the class. She said they weren't just having meaningless conversations about what they watched on TV or the game or like anything. She said they were answering each other's questions and giving each other ideas. And so she said, and then I realized, wow, they're actually part of their discussion that they're having on their own time when they're like, just moving about the classroom, was all about the work that they were doing in the classroom. She goes, and that's how I knew, she said, that they wanted to do this work, because they felt the need to figure it out, and they were sort of challenging themselves, right? And she said, and it was she said, like, that was that aha moment for her. It was like, wow, this is sort of what it's been about all along, and I don't have to have that total silence where they finish that last page in the workbook and they hand it in to me, because they're already doing it on their own, right? And that spoke volumes to me. And it was a proud moment, right? To see that in a classroom.
You said, I'm glad they're talking to each other. That's a good thing for sure. We're going to continue forward if that works for people here. And now I feel like this is kind of the flip side of it, right? Moving from compliance for, or completing things for compliance sake versus really digging in. The other side that we hear often from educators, right, is the reality that we still have to prepare students for standardized assessments, right? Kind of alongside this really beautiful space that we're all describing as far as students truly engaging in the work. And Principal Marie, if we could start with you, when I think about this delicate balance between dealing with the realities of standardized assessments, it really made me wonder about, in a school like Richmond Hill that has your 6 career connected academies, how do you maintain a deeper focus on careers while also ensuring that, students are being prepared for, let's say, regents or, any other assessments that they are, that they're having to do right alongside all of this learning?
That's a good question. So the way programming makes a huge difference. So and letting the students know what they're applying to in ninth grade, that the expectation is for them to have an advanced Regents diploma as well as a CTE endorsement by the time they graduate. So to answer the question is, how do you prepare students for standardized assessments? It goes back to the classroom and what are the objectives that the teachers are putting out there, and are they aligned to the regions? And then separately from that, um, are they aligned to the standards? Are they, rigorous? Um, are there going to be times where you're giving the students something that doesn't translate into with what the regions is asking, right? So there's a skill component, and then there's also the content component.
Hmm.
So
Sure.
some of our literacy learning team, we dissected all of the regions and we found literacy skills that can help the students succeed across all regions, and that includes math and biology and chemistry. Because the way the regions are written, you have to have certain literacy skills to be able to answer the question. There are actually some questions that you don't even need to know the content if you know how to find the main idea, if you know how to compare and contrast. Um, so when you're doing authentic learning, you're not just teaching to the test, you're also doing some conceptual understanding, because sometimes that content might not show up on the exam. But if you're understanding, the bigger picture and being able to pivot with your thinking, you can master that exam. And then you have to look into, the different subgroups here. What are the different what are the students, what are some of the barriers or, circumstances like, having an IEP, and what does that learning disability look like? And how does the instruction change there? If you're an English language learner, you can take the regions in your language except for English, right? So how do you prep the student to, learn a new language and write essays in a new language, but they only been in the country for a year? Right? So there's the
Hmm.
intensive supports, the multi-tier supports programs that we have in place, and it all goes back to authentic learning. One of my going back to the previous question, is the compliance piece, right? We do a lot of back-end data to or data digging to find out what the learning gaps are, and then you put out the strategies that teachers can use. The worst thing that could be done is doing things for compliance. And I think it starts from the top,
Hmm.
and it's using your language to raise the level of concern of what needs to be done to move the student so that we prioritize authentic learning, that's backed up by data. Same thing as I always say this when you go to the doctor's office. You're just not going to drink a specific medicine unless you were diagnosed with something, so it's the same thing. You're not going to teach a certain way or to a certain subgroup unless you have the data supporting that they have these instructional gaps or skill gaps.
Or so I'm hearing a lot of intensive, maybe intentional is a better word, intentional scaffolding, and not just a focus on, okay, here are the standards, but there's also a conceptual component. There's also the skills component, and that actually made me think about you. You were talking about literacy skills kind of across content areas, which we hear a lot from every teacher we work with, right, and leaders, especially with the new science regents coming out this year for New York State. We've been hearing that a lot from our science teachers in particular. authentic experiences, you're still practicing those skills that will then be applied in standardized assessment, which I think is such a huge, it can be hugely overlooked oftentimes. So I appreciate you kind of naming that as well. Um, Dr. Barry, Principal Hanson, anything you want to kind of add on to this real challenge, I would say, for teachers and leaders in schools?
Yeah, I can jump in. I don't think this answers the direct question of, how to ensure that students are gaining the skill to exactly answer the correct question on whatever exam they're needing to take, standardized exam they're going to take across the country. But what I have found, again, in my research and my study and running Smart Lab, is when you focus on the reasoning. So the teachers know, oh, here's the skills that we need to teach, by the end of the year or by the end of the semester, right? But when you focus on the reasoning behind, not just the outcomes, that's when they have to translate that to a standardized test, it becomes easier for them. Opposed to just, I've memorized something, I know that skill now, and I'm going to demonstrate it on this standardized test. That focus on the reasoning, not just the outcomes, I have seen and I've found and I've witnessed. That's when higher levels of success on standardized tests occur, right? And you can do that in the classroom by having students document their process, right? So if they're learning something, they have to document their process, whether it's through testing data, design, flow charts, team discussions, but they have to document that. And if you're documenting that, and you're documenting maybe your design process, or you're documenting your data, or how you've iterated, or your revisions. And then, of course, students, and I think both of these principals have talked about students explaining their decisions, explaining how they got to these answers. That sort of focus on reasoning when they get to standardized tests can serve them because it can translate across many different skills that you're trying to accomplish. So that sort of focusing on reasoning for administrators, for teachers in the classroom to think about, focus on the reasoning and having students document their process. That really can shift not just getting it done. And again, not just asking, did it work? But like, how did your thinking evolve? Right? Because that I find often, reflection for students is did that work? Did you succeed? Right? That really is reflection, whether it worked or
is
didn't
your
work.
answer reasonable, right? That's the
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
sure it is.
Yeah, exactly. What we're really asking and what really can translate, I think, in a stronger way to standardized test thinking across any discipline is, how did your thinking evolve as you were working through that problem? How did your thinking evolve? And that sort of question for students on how their thinking evolved through documenting their process forces the students to explain their answers and explain how they got there, and explain maybe even their failures or their missteps, that can then translate to when they're filling out, their bubbles on a standardized test.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that. We have just a few minutes left together. So I would love to kind of jump ahead here a little bit, and maybe Principal Hanson, if you want to kind of kick us off with our last question here. And I would also invite, those that are here with us live, if you have specific questions, if you want to drop them in the chat, please feel free. But maybe we can kind of end with a little bit of a round robin, for use of an old term there. Any advice that we would give educators, including leaders who are looking to move in this direction of authentic, deep thinking in classrooms that's not compliance driven, and gets us to that vibe that we're looking for? Principal Hanson, do you want to kick us off?
My feeling on this, it's that idea of starting small but being intentional. I think if you start with that idea in mind, and you know where you're going with it, listen, that the transition from this to a project-based learning or an inquiry-driven model, it doesn't happen overnight. Your teachers have to be supported. I think the coaching models that your professional development for your teachers has to be intentional. Your messaging, as Dr. Berry said, has to be, this idea of why, this what's the purpose of it? Like, why are we doing it? That when we want the kids to do that with a standardized, like, coming into a standardized test, or to learn, that has to be reflected in your process too. The students need to know, why are we doing it this way? Why is this way beneficial? Your community, your stakeholders, like, this is why and it's allowing that process to happen. And when they start to see the results, and they start again to, like, reevaluate their process, and they start to think about how they've evolved, right? How their learning has evolved. It starts to happen overnight. And listen, Emily, from seeing some of our teachers, and it doesn't happen for all of them right away too. And there's that, giving them time,
Sure.
because it's a total shift in the way that many of them have been, so quote unquote, taught to teach, right? Or the
Hmm.
way that
Hmm.
students think they have to learn, or the way that parents think that students have to learn because that's the way that they learned. And we're not learning that, that has evolved. Learning has evolved. And I think that's a big task for anybody to take on. But I think that idea, again, starting small, but be intentional and don't give
Appreciate
up.
that. Thank you. Yeah, that's a big one for sure.
I can jump in here. My biggest advice is to think about learning as an ecosystem rather than a single activity. An ecosystem is really built of a lot of different um, pieces, and when one piece of the ecosystem is wavering or hurting, then another piece of the ecosystem can't, and then the learning can't be optimized. At Smart Lab, we actually think of our ecosystem as 5 components, right? It's actually the learning environment, so you can do these hands-on project-based tasks, right? What does that environment look like, feel like? Can they move? Can they get out of their seat? Can they get down on the ground? That environment is really critical. Then, of course, the curriculum and the hands-on tools and equipment are really important to serve the learning. But the facilitator, right? And we intentionally call our instructors facilitators at Smart Lab, because they're facilitating learning. They're not instructing. They're not the sage on the stage, as they call it, right? They're really facilitating and allowing for that productive struggle and failure to occur. But it's also the partnership of the community, right? The partnership of the community coming in and saying, hey, I use this kind of STEM application, or I use this way of systems thinking in my job, or I use this approach to the work in this way. And that really can help resonate and set in, right? And then, of course, this idea that you have project-based activities built into the learning it needs to be a part of the ecosystem now, because as AI can do most of the tasks, in order for students to learn how to fail, to learn how to think, to learn how to critically think, to collaborate with others, they're going to have to not use AI first, and to collaborate with each other, and work a problem out and fail, as we talked about earlier in this discussion. So my biggest advice for educators is to really think about learning as an ecosystem rather than a single activity. And that can really catapult the brain to say, what else can I do in my classroom or environment to serve this ecosystem? Is the environment set up? Am I being a facilitator, not the instructor? And do I have the right tools and equipment? Do I have the right curriculum? Do I have the right partners to come in to deepen that learning for students? So really thinking about the learning as an ecosystem, I think, is the biggest advice I would have to give to educators right now.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. Appreciate it. Principal Elmer, you want to
So
round us off here?
so the advice I would give to educators, it's a culture, right? I had to deal with that same thing with doing things with fidelity, whether it's lesson planning or attending PDs and being present, or ensuring that one of our initiatives, like increasing student discussion or rigor in the classroom, using, Bloom's taxonomy and, a menu of discussion techniques is actually happening. So one of the things that I noticed was, you know, teachers would say, "Oh, we've done this before. This has been going on for the last 10 years." But then when we go into a classroom and you see the discussion strategies, the first thing is think, pair, share, right? But even that wasn't, you could verbally say it, but if it's not happening, what are your next moves, right? But that you can tell that it's not a culture, right? So I make it known that if I do a feedback or if I do like actual observation, that I'm going to give you feedback based on what I've seen, based on the evidence, right? And then in a bigger picture, just letting the staff know that these are what we're going to be measured on, right? And this is how students learn, right? And so when you have to have a culture of when something gets rolled out, it has to be done with fidelity and not just compliance. Um, and I think eventually, year after year, month after month, meeting after meeting, once you increase the accountability systems, you and there's consistent feedback around that language, then they start listening, right? Right? Because then if you're effective or highly effective, but you're not using any of the initiatives, eventually it gets tied um, to the advanced rubric, right? So once that happens, I think then you see the buy-in increase, and it's like, oh, this is not going away, right? This is something that's research based. It's based on our data from the school. When we break it down by subgroups, and eventually the majority start to see it once you have that passion and actually backed up with data. Um, you see a positive trend.
Thank you so much, Principal Ellery. I appreciate, I think that what you're all speaking to here also is the complexity behind moving school communities as a collection of individual beings, right? Our teachers, and then even beyond that, our other stakeholders, our students and our families as well. This whole idea of what's kind of one lever, if I could borrow words from all of you here, one small, first move from you, Principal Hansen, to kind of move the uh, a specific lever in the ecosystem, Dr. Barry, that you were naming, and Principal Ellery, like how are we moving together, right? What are we doing to make sure that this is a continued push? And that actually, just to end with this here as well, leads me to my final piece here. So I'm trying to get it up on my screen. In that, you're not alone in this. Principal Hansen, you mentioned coaching, professional development. Principal Mallory, you're really talking about accountability and feedback, right? A huge piece of this is what is that consistent support I'm providing for my teachers, for my leaders as we're moving in this direction? Because it's not easy. It's oftentimes disrupting misconceptions, right, around what this really means. We started off today talking about the fact that rigor was out there, and after 5 years of us tossing it around as a national buzzword, no one really could tell you what it actually meant, right? That's not uncommon, right? There's a lot in education where we really need to continuously support and provide teams to support our leaders and our teachers. And so, what we did want to leave everyone here today live and then also in the recording is that we do want to offer this gift to you. So we have a self-assessment connected to our innovation spectrum, which is essentially a rubric of common language across different high leverage focus areas that include strategies and different practices that teachers are using that students are engaging in classrooms. And this serves as a self-assessment, just to kind of see where you're at, right? There are specific sections on authentic learning, which we discussed a lot today, but there's also sections on higher order thinking and all of these kind of pieces that we tossed around and that surfaced in a lot of our conversation today. So we highly recommend taking the time to use that self-assessment for a quick reflection, uh, especially for leaders. If we have teachers that are interested in it, go for it as well. We encourage it. And then leaders, there is a free strategy session following that self-assessment. So we wanted to offer that as a gift up to you all today. But Principal Hansen, Principal Ellery, Dr. Barry, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss this big R word. And I really enjoyed the conversations. I'm sure all of us did here as well. I'll stop sharing so we can See everybody's faces a little better, maybe. There we go. So thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and
You
hopefully
too.
we'll be talking to each other again soon.
Yes.
Take care.
Most appreciated. Thank you.